Honourable Peter Dunn.
Chairman, I thought I should take a call at this point because I'm the one common link in the chain that the member opposite has referred to. And I want to go back to the 2007 situation because he made some comments early in his contribution which really go to the core of what the issue is. Consequent upon the then Labor government's decision to introduce interest-free student loan repayments for domestic borrowers after the 2005 election and to retain an interest component for those who are overseas, we had the immediate challenge of locating who the overseas students were, or the overseas borrowers, and where they were. And the member may recall that we had a de facto amnesty at that point, where we allowed students or borrowers to come forward, identify where they were, so we could actually get them into the system, because frankly, a flat in Dunedin is not actually a good address for a lot of people in Northern Europe, and we had many, many people in that case. What we discovered was that while a substantial number did come forward, around 14 or 15,000 from memory, there's a large group that we haven't got. We still do not know where they are, and yet they still have a student loan responsibility. And I guess the starting point that we would all agree on around this committee tonight is that people who take out a loan have a responsibility to repay it. Don't think there's any debate about that point. But it's not fair, and I think we would agree on this as well, it is not fair to have a situation where some people are being forced to repay and others are not being. So you start to move up the scale. And what we did in 2007 was to say, well, look, there's a trade-off here. If the borrowers will effectively identify themselves as being absent from New Zealand before they leave, we will give them a period of time where they're not required to make repayments. I remember the quotation that's been attributed to me. It's dead right. It's utterly accurate. And it was a pragmatic solution because we frankly, Dr. Cullen and I, at that point, did not have a clear sense of what a reasonable period of time was. And we thought 3 years seemed reasonable. We thought that was a good test of the New Zealand OE. But, Mr. Chairman, looking at subsequent experience, and one ought to be guided by experience, I've always found it to be quite a useful concept to value. What we found is that most people who go overseas who are notified to us are overseas for less than 3 years. Most are actually overseas for less than 2 years. And we also found that the time frame of the length of the holiday had little impact on people's decision about when they repaid. So when you start to think about that, you start to think about the signals you want to send in terms of people overseas having a responsibility to repay. You bear in mind the fact that already their rate of repayment is about 3 times slower than of domestically based borrowers, and that they are our real problem. Mr. Chairman, you look at the work we've been doing in Australia to track down recalcitrant borrowers, to make them make payments and in some cases take them to the court to achieve those objectives. Then you have to question the validity of retaining the 3-year holiday period. And the conclusion that we reached in the context of the framing of this legislation was that for all those reasons, 5 years down the track, a 1-year limit was now more reasonable. Mr. Chairman, I want to make some comments about the nominated person, because these things go hand in hand. As I said earlier, one of the problems we had was a large number of borrowers who had fled our shores, last known address a flat in Dunedin or somewhere, no effective way of making contact with them. Parents not all that inclined, for obvious reasons, to want to dob their recalcitrant borrowing children in. Various other people not particularly inclined to give us information. So what we're saying effectively is, to be part of the scheme, you need to nominate a person who will be a contact point. I agree with Mr. Robertson, actually. I've heard many, many stories and seen many, many instances of the papers piling up and being ignored. That is pointless. So the nominated person is designed to be a point of contact so that at least we can go to them and the revenue can go to them and say, who is responsible, where is this person, how can we make contact with them? What we've also discovered over the last 5 years is an increasing number, in fact a significant number, of our borrowers are in contact through various web pages, the internet, various news sites, etc. So a lot more focus is going in on that point as well. So I say this to Mr. Robertson and to others, that the argument that we are somehow shifting the goalposts by changing the repayment period from 3 years to 1 year, A, does not fit the current reality, Mr Chairman, in terms of what people are doing overseas. It actually has no impact, based on our experience to date, on their ability and timing of their willingness to repay. And thirdly, one factor that is becoming increasingly obvious subsequently is we are not operating here in a vacuum. The United Kingdom has just made significant changes to its rules regarding residency for people coming from offshore. So many of the people who go over for their OE won't be in the United Kingdom for 3 years anyway. They won't be able to stay there. So the point of giving them a holiday that they can't fully access seems to me to be a little beside the point. Mr Chairman, what we are seeking to do in this bill is to send the very clear signal that there is a responsibility to repay an outstanding loan, to send the very clear signal that it's not a sort of a game of how far you can get away from New Zealand to mean the way in which your responsibilities reduce. I don't think it's at all acceptable that we have a really good rate of repayment for domestic borrowers and a very poor rate for overseas borrowers. And the argument that it's difficult for them to make contact, or that they're a long way away, or that they feel out of touch with New Zealand these days, all these things that I've heard in the last few years, I think are utterly unacceptable. The basic commitment is if you've got a loan, you are expected to repayment. And what this bill does is seek to reinforce that basic precept. So, Mr Chairman, the shift from 3 to 1 is in fact a recognition of reality. It's not going to deter people from having their time overseas. Coupled with the introduction of the contact person, it makes it better for us and easier for us at Inland Revenue to keep track of where they are, and we will see over time a better rate of repayment. And what that does is send a signal to those people who have repaid their loans on time, conscientiously over the years, that actually their sacrifice has not been in vain. It is simply not fair for some people to get away with paying little or nothing, while others diligently, at a time of their lives when they might well want to be doing something else, are meeting their loan repayments. Mr Chairman, this bill is if I can use the member's term, a pragmatic response to the current situation. It is a common-sense solution, and, Mr Chairman, it will work. And it goes without saying, as I conclude, that the amendments that he and the Greens have proposed will not be supported by this side of the House.
Mr Chairman.
David Clark.